Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man? They say murder three. Strange things that happen here. How stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?
Back in 1776, someone said, "Give me coffee or give me death." And if that's how you feel, you should be at the Organic Man Coffee Tribe. They make coffee the right way, one delicious cup at a time. 4501 McPherson, Suite Number 9. Coffee, the stuff dreams are made of. And welcome to the show. I'm your host, Chris James. Tonight, we're going to be talking about the Tumacacori Mine. I have a longtime listener and friend, Bill Lahr, to thank for sending me the articles that got me to put this show together. There's some kind of a mystical draw that pulls people to look for buried treasure. My favorite TV show is The Curse of Oak Island. From what I see on the ads, this is one of the most popular shows running. Just about any treasure hunting show will draw a huge crowd. Now, Rick and Marty have a new show, Beyond Oak Island. Before we look south, there are many lost mines scattered all over the country. The story of the Lost Soldier Mine comes from Arizona. It was located north of the Tumacacori Mountain. In the summer of 1869, Abner McKeever and his family were ambushed by Apache Indians on a ranch near the Big Bend of the Gila River. McKeever's daughter Belle was taken captive. As soon as the military could be contacted, a number of soldiers were sent out to chase down the Indians and hopefully get Belle back. The Apache separated into several bands, making it more difficult for the soldiers to follow. It's far easier to follow a big group. They leave behind a bigger trail. The split would also cause the soldiers to have to break up into smaller groups. They would have to follow every trail, not knowing which group had Belle with them. Sergeant Crosthwaite and two privates, Joe Wormley and Eugene Flanagan, were sent to follow a few Indians heading away from the rest. After a long, hard chase, the two of their horses dropped dead from fatigue and thirst, and their provisions ran out. Taking some of the horse flesh with them, the soldiers took up the trail, but moved much slower. The rescue mission turned into a desperate search for water. They knew about the Granite Wash range of mountains in northern Yuma County. The three soldiers made their way to what they hoped was a water supply. They did find water just in time to save their lives. Wormsley had already become somewhat delirious. The weird thing about dehydration is it causes diarrhea. Diarrhea causes more dehydration, which leads to more diarrhea. Your brain stops functioning correctly. You start making really bad decisions. Whatever you do, don't drink urine. During dehydration, urine can get up to 3% sodium. Your normal sodium level is 0.9%. Urine is 3 times as salty as what should go into your body. Your body will try to flush this excess sodium out by using water, which you don't have enough of as it is. You should read Cody Lundine's book, When All Hell Breaks Loose. Lots of information on how to survive, and not just in the desert, but simply to survive if there's a minor problem in your life. As the men were filling their canteens, they spotted shiny things in the bottom of the river. Reaching down and grabbing a handful, they discovered there was gold on the bottom of the river. Small gold nuggets, but enough to fill their hands each time they reached into the water. On the hill, right next to the river, was a pair of quartz veins running back into the mountains. The soldiers filled their saddlebags with gold and quartz and then loaded the remaining horse with their findings. They set out for the Gila River, hoping to find Belle and her captives, or at least the rest of their unit. Less than a day's journey from the river, the last remaining horse fell over dead. The soldiers were undecided as to whether to continue on to Gila or return to the small river where they knew there was water. In a last bid for survival, they split up. Wormley set in the direction of Gila River, while his two companions turned around and headed back the way they had come. Wormley was able to reach the river, and there he found the rest of the original search party that had set out days ago. He was so far gone he was unable to tell the others where he had separated from the sergeant or other private. He didn't live much longer. His tracks were still visible in the sand, so a rescue party was dispatched to backtrack to the others. They found Flanagan laying in the desert. He was barely alive. After being given water and some rest, Flanagan told the rescuers his sergeant was further ahead on the same trail. The rescuers found Sergeant Crosthwaite's body a few miles further. The men checked his pockets for anything valuable to be sent home to his family. In one pocket, they found a crude hand-drawn map showing the location of the gold. His body was placed over the saddle of a horse and returned to the rest of the unit. A few men continued the direction the sergeant had been walking. After a few minutes, they came to the dead horse. In the saddlebags was the gold nuggets and the ore that the three men had taken from the river. The rescue party took the saddlebags and they returned to the Gila River. Since Flanagan was the sole survivor of the three-man detail, he was allowed to keep the gold. It was sold for $1,800, which is about $59,000 today. I wonder if this is true. It doesn't sound like something the Army would do. Usually the commanding officer would notify some politician, and that politician would say the gold should be sent to Washington, where it'd wind up vanishing into that same politician's private bank. Flanagan made several unsuccessful attempts to return to the river, but he was now afraid of the desert, and he would never travel very far from the river. He died in Phoenix in 1880. The story of the Lost Soldier Mine began to spread around the country. People came from all over to try their hand at prospecting. There were many mines built in the mountains near where the crude map might have shown the discovery, but nobody knows for sure if the river filled with gold and the veins of quartz were ever really found. Some prospectors say Lost Soldier Mine was located at the Harquahala Mountains. Others will tell you it was where the Bonanza Mine was put in. There are also many folks out there still searching for the location that kind of matches the sergeant's hand-drawn map. Another Lost Soldier Mine was found by a scouting party from Old Fort Grant in the hills north of the Gila River, not far from the mouth of the San Pedro. His discovery was a quartz-speckled area with gold. The country had been thoroughly prospected since that time, and mines have been worked in the vicinity, but the nearest approach to the discovery of the old-time bonanza has been in the finding of a placer gold in several of the gulches. A placer gold is what you find while panning for gold, as opposed to lode gold, which has to be dug out of the ground. The Indians living in the area that would become Arizona had discovered silver deposits on the surface of the ground. Silver could be used to make all manner of decoration, so the Indians would dig up any they could easily reach. On occasion, they would find gold as well. These precious metals were only valued for their artistic use. The Indians didn't dig up silver and gold and make it into bars only to bury it away for safekeeping, unlike some folks do today. As the Spanish conquistadors were scouting out new land for their king and looking for treasure to fill their pockets, Catholic monks would travel with them with the intentions of converting the Indians. The monks would have either a church or a mission built in any remote locations. A church would be just a building, whereas a mission would be kind of like a fort. The missionaries had a second goal in mind. They preached to their new congregations. They'd discovered valuable ore in the area in 1766, and they convinced their parishioners to work digging out gold and silver to be sent back to Europe. This was the same silver the Indians had already been using for years. The Plata Indians preferred working in one particular mine where they felt more at ease. This was where they wanted to work. They wanted to work at that one mine more so than any of the other mines in the area. Well, the missionaries decided to allow this because that one mine was highly profitable. At the back of this mine, they had built a great big room where all the silver was stored in a pile in the center of the room. Despite their best efforts to convert the Indians, the Plata utilized the big room, piled with all that silver, during the night to perform their old pagan rituals. They absorbed some of the preachings from the priest because when they saw a Mayo-Indian Mayo-Indian princess traveling through the desert, they were convinced that she was the Virgin Mary. The Indians kidnapped her. They took her to the big room, piled with silver, and they told her that she would marry their chief in order to produce a child savior, the next Jesus of sorts. The princess refused, saying she would rather die. Maybe the chief was ugly, or he had really bad breath. You just can't force somebody to love you. The Indians said if she would not marry their chief, then they would sacrifice her to their gods. The princess chose death, so I guess the chief was really gross with bad B.O. One Sunday when the Indians had the day off, they killed the princess and then began dancing around in the big room. When one of the missionaries heard the commotion coming from the mine, he went to investigate and he found the dead woman still tied up, laying next to the silver, and there were the Indians dancing around her. Appalled that their preachings had been so violated, the missionaries sealed the mine entrance, leaving the princess and all that silver inside. This legend was passed down from one generation to the next. Also, it is said that some of the priests wrote this down in one of their journals. According to the legend, both the silver and her skeletal remains are still hidden somewhere near the Tumacacori Mission. Old Spanish records place the Plata mine halfway between the Guadalupe mine and the Pure Concepcion mine, just waiting to be found. The legends say that the church was once not only a place of worship, but also a mill and a smelter for gold and silver mining operations run by either Jesuit or Franciscan missionaries in the first half of the 19th century. The missionaries learned they were about to be sent back to Spain, So they loaded nearly 3,000 burros with precious metal, carried the treasure to the mine, and then buried the entrance in the hope that they'd come back and retrieve it someday. Once back in Spain, they were never allowed to leave. An estimated $25 million in gold and silver may lay hidden beneath the ground where the silver and gold mines once stood. In another version, the gold and silver were taken down into the cellars of the mission, and the floor was dug up. The valuables were piled in, and then the floor was remade, making it look as if nothing were there but dirt or stone. This next bit of information was found in some old church documents located in Spain. The name of the church and the person who tracked it down was not written into the article. A mine, known as the Virgin of Guadalupe, was worked from 1508 until 1648. The mine began its use by the Tumacacori Indians, who worked it for silver found on the surface. When the Spaniards arrived, they began working the site as a full-blown mine. The mine was 1 league southwest from the front door of the Tumakakori Mission. A league was a unit of measurement from Europe. It was about the distance a person could walk in an hour. Some say a league was about 2 or 3.5 miles. When I was working sign cutting, we went with the alien's ability to walk 3 miles an hour. The mine was also 1,800 varas from the San Ramon River. A vara is 33.33 inches. This would be about 5,000 feet, just under a mile. 200 varas from the mine, you would find a black stone with a cross carved into it. Just past the cross, you might find slabs of silver buried under the ground. These slabs were either 25 to 250 pounds apiece. When I did the research, the price for 1 pound of silver was $206. The 25-pound bars would sell for $5,000, and the 250-pound bars would go for $50,000. Of course, now, who's going to want to carry a 250-pound bar of silver? The area that all this silver is hidden in is very large, and all of the signs that led to the mine have been erased, so nobody could find it without having the correct map. Anyone looking for this treasure field would first need to locate the original Indian village. The Tumakakori Village used to be about 25 miles northwest from where the ruins of the Tumakakori Mission is located today. To add a little more confusion, there were 2 Tumakakori missions. One was referred to as the Upper Mission, which was set on the slopes of the Sierrita Mountains to distinguish it from the other site. Then there was also the Tumakakori Church, which was located near one of the mines. People watching The Curse of Oak Island will see Gary Drayton swinging his metal detector back and forth and finding something for Jack Bagley to dig up. It looks like they spend about 1 minute between discoveries. The film crew might shoot all day before anything is found. The editors cut out all the monotony of metal detecting, only showing the fun parts. It isn't nearly as exciting as it looks on TV. That black rock has been removed, and all the signs of silver mining have been erased. One man spent 12 years and $25,000 looking for the Guadalupe treasure. He knew he had the right location. He did the research. He was positive he was in the right location. He had a map and copies of documents from Spain. Too bad he didn't know about the second mission. This guy was doing all of his measurements off of the lower mission. The upper mission was totally destroyed, making finding it about as hard as finding the treasure to begin with. Just to add a little more confusion, there may have been a third mission also lost to time. Nobody knows if the third mission actually existed or is just a story to make finding the real treasure that much harder. Some folks have come to the conclusion the treasure was buried inside the San Jose de Tumacacori mission. Hundreds of would-be millionaires have dug up the land around the old structure. Many have begged for permission to excavate the floor of the mission, convinced they know the treasure is there. Thinking there's just might be as much as $45 million buried in the property, now owned by the state, people have gone to some huge extremes trying to get at that treasure. Back in 1889, a priest from Spain arrived in Tucson looking for a chest filled with old church records. Not knowing the area, the priest inquired at the courthouse. He told Judge Barnes the chest had held important documents pertinent to day-to-day life and were more interesting than valuable. The chest had been buried when a hostile band of Indians attacked the monks. Wishing to reclaim the chest at a later date, the monks had drawn up a set of directions which the priest now had. The judge, seeing what to him looked like a possible treasure map, thought these documents were associated with the lost treasure, so he offered his assistance in looking for the chest. Several associates joined the men, and they headed to the Tumacacori Mountains. The band of treasure hunters were perplexed by the location the old priest was leading them to. They had always heard the treasure was buried east of the Santa Cruz River. They were now heading west, away from the river. After following the directions into the mountains, the men were asked to dig in a particular spot. They did, uncovering a huge wooden chest. They were ecstatic up until the chest was opened and it contained nothing but a bunch of papers. The men packed their things and headed back to their homes. Judge Barnes chose to hang on, thinking maybe that map had more information than the priest knew about or was letting on to. Once back in Tucson, the priest and the judge parted ways. As a way of thanking him for his help, the priest gave the map to the judge. The directions on the map were written in archaic Spanish. Just like how in English many words have changed their meanings, the words on the map were nearly unintelligible. The judge did find somebody who could translate the map to the best of their ability, and the judge was convinced he now had a map to the Tumacacori treasure. Using what was supposed to be the map, Judge Barnes spent most of his remaining time looking for the treasure. To his dying day, he was convinced he was on the right track. Whoever had done the translating had inserted the word mission into the directions. The Tumacacori Indians, as well as the mountain, had been there for years before the Spanish mission was built. Tumacacori, Arizona, has somewhere around 16,500 mines. This is based on the mines that were registered, not to include any mines built in the dead of night and never mentioned to the authorities. Tumacacori is an unincorporated community in Santa Cruz County, Arizona. A teacher had gone to study the missions in Arizona as a hobby. He found a copy of the original set of directions from the Spanish priest. He compared them to the translation directions given to the judge, and he discovered there were some discrepancies. And not being a treasure hunter, he set aside his findings. During another trip to Arizona, the teacher made contact with a treasure hunter interested in the interested in the Tumakakori legend. They compared notes, and this led them to decide the treasure was not buried in reference to the mission, but in reference to a mine. The teacher found a story written down by a Spanish soldier named Martinez, who was in a unit being moved north from Mexico in 1596. During a nightly stop, one of the older soldiers told about being involved in a shipment of treasure being moved from a mine in the Tumakacori Mountains. The treasure was buried a short distance from the mine. Martinez decided it was far better to slip away and find the treasure than to spend his days as a lowly army conscript. He convinced a few of his comrades to go with him. The plan was to slip away from the unit and then sneak up on the miners, kill them, and take as much silver as they could carry. They would head home with enough wealth to live like kings. Never mind being AWOL from the army. Plans often go awry. The local Indians spotted the band of soldiers moving through the area. A small band of lightly armed men was an easy target. After several days and many attacks, only Martinez was still alive. Wandering through the brush, nearly dead from starvation and a lack of water, Martinez managed to stumble upon a church. This church was built near the mine, years before the Tumakakori mission was in existence. Just being happy to be alive, Martinez wrote down his misadventures, and then he went on with his life. As the teacher continued translating, he found out there had been 6 mines scattered about the mountains. By comparing the descriptions to the known area, he decided the mines might have been found in El Pajarito and El Ruido mountains. The Opeta mine was 1 league south of the Tumacacori mine. The Tumacacori mine is supposed to have a covered box hidden in it that holds maps to all the other silver mines in the area. If you can find this one mine, you can find the others. Inside each of these 6 mines is said to be silver or gold already smelted and formed into bars. All you have to do is find the mine, load up your pack mule, or maybe you'd prefer a camel, to haul the precious metals to the bank. The Virgin of Guadalupe mine is supposed to hold bars of silver, while the Pure Concepcion mine holds gold. The San Pedro and the San Isabel are each 1 league from each other. Each one is the repository of either gold or silver bars. As the years went by, miners found places to dig into the sides of mountains and haul out silver by the truckload. One mine is the Planchas de Plata mine, which translates to slabs of silver. In 1736, a silver discovery became the Planchas de Plata mine, about 15 miles from a ranch that was then called the Arizona. Good thing for would-be treasure hunters, the ranch is still called the Arizona. In 1870, prospectors made a discovery that became the Austerlitz Mine. As they dug, they found indications that mining activity had gone on in the area for centuries. The silver mines dotting the mountains of Arizona don't seem to include the 6 mines associated with the Tumacacori mine. No one has announced finding any mines with silver or gold bars already there for the taking. Maybe someday soon somebody will stumble upon 1 or 2 of the lost mines of the Tumakakori Indians. Now just a few brief words for some of my friends with businesses so that maybe they can stay in business for a while longer. Pat's Kitchen at 5517 McPherson is the best place to get a hamburger in the entire state, as far as I'm concerned. They have an old 50s style restaurant, which sometimes you can eat there and sometimes you only have to take orders to go. But it's a good place to have lunch or dinner. Optica del Norte, 107 Calle del Norte, is the place you want to go if you can't see what you're looking at. If your eyes aren't working right, go get them checked. If your skin is beginning to look like something Lon Chaney would act with, you need to contact Lourdes James at 956-723-3019 and see about putting something on your skin to make it look a little more human. And if you hear a bump in the night and you think you just might have a ghost lurking in your living room, contact the Laredo Paranormal Research Society. You can get a hold of them at laredoparanormal@hotmail.com. You just might have a ghost, or it could be faulty pipes. You never know. And with that, let's get back to the mining. A story about what might have been the Tumacacori Mine came by way of a vaquero outriding the range. Sometime around 1950, he came upon two men camped near an old stone corral left over from the days of Spanish habitation. Stopping to chat, he got around to talking about a Papago Indian that used to visit the local trading post. Back in the 1930s, the Indian would come in for supplies once in a while. When it was time to pay, he would pull out a leather bag filled with gold nuggets. The shop owner was intrigued, and he began asking about where the gold had come from. At long last, the Indian told the shop owner there was a cave up in the mountains that held a vast treasure. There were gold and silver bars lined up along the walls and bags filled with gold nuggets. Thinking the gold bars would draw way too much attention, the Indian settled for taking a few handfuls of gold nuggets each time he went. The shop owner told the Indian he knew a mine owner that could take the gold bars and process them into looking like they had been found in his mine. The Indian thought this just might work out, so he agreed to take the shop owner into the mountains. As they were working their way up a narrow path, a small rock slide came down from above. This scared the Indian, who thought this might be a sign he was displeasing the spirits that controlled the mountain. The Indian refused to go any farther. He went back to their camp, gathered his things, and vanished, never returning to the trading post. The shop owner figured he could find the cave on his own. Now he wouldn't have to split the reward with his former guide. For years the shop owner was seen wandering up and down the canyon, looking for the opening to the fabled cave. Once the vaquero had passed on the story to the two campers were hooked. They began searching the area, trying to find the cave or mine found by the Papago Indian. The area they searched was just 30 miles south from Tucson, an easy drive. Once at the right location, things got interesting. The trails were nothing to look at, just a place to set one foot after another. The mountains rain down rocks from above all the time. Storms come up out of nowhere and wash anyone and anything not tied to a tree some away. Sometimes they even wash the trees away. In the summer months, the temperature gets up to 120 degrees. In the winter, it gets down to freezing. Wind and rain are a common problem. The story of the Papago Indian has a twist of sorts. Another man named Luis told of how many years ago, right after World War II, he had encountered an old prospector that would head into a canyon and then return with bags filled with gold. The cowboy had spotted the prospector as he walked into a canyon. The man was out of sight for a short time and then returned, carrying 2 saddlebags. The bags looked heavy. The prospector mounted his horse and then rode back to his truck. Once the horse was loaded up, the prospector drove towards Tucson. Just an odd story to tell around the campfire. That is, until Lewis was visiting his family. As he was passing on his wild encounter, his nephew, Manuel, announced he knew this prospector. He said he had met this old guy named Walt that offered him riches beyond his wildest dreams if he would help the prospector manage one last trip. The prospector was losing his sight and could no longer drive. He asked Manuel to drive him into the mountains and then help him carry one last load of treasure into town, and the young man would be free to return to the cave or the mine and take what was left. This sounded like a way to find some treasure without all that wandering about dying from thirst, so Manuel agreed. The two drove to the base of the Tumacacori Mountains and then parked near a canyon. It was just fortunate for them that the Park Service had built a road that ran right past the canyon they needed. No more riding horses around in the brush. Walt got out of the truck, and Manuel led him to the beginning of the canyon trail. It was slow going since Walt could barely see where to put one foot after the other. He stumbled along as Manuel followed, hoping the old guy wouldn't trip and fall off the trail into a deep crevasse. Walt told Manuel to look for a huge rock shaped like an egg. It was one of those landmarks you just can't miss, or so he said. Manuel looked for the egg-shaped rock as they walked. Finally, he found what kind of looked like an egg, and he told Walt they were there. Walt began feeling around the rock, trying to find a flat rock he said covered the cave entrance. As time ticked by, the flat rock refused to appear. Walt began to get mad. He knew the rock was there someplace, but he couldn't find it by feel, and he no longer had the eyes to see it. Thinking a flash flood might have come rumbling down the canyon and swept the rock away, depositing dirt and debris in its place, Walt finally gave up. He and Manuel walked back to their truck with nothing to show for their time but sunburn and blisters. This could have been the end of the story, seeing as Manuel wasn't certain Walt was even close to the right canyon, except Lewis kind of knew where Walt had been looking. He remembered watching Walt walk into the canyon and then return after a few minutes. The cave had to be close to that entrance. Lewis searched for the cave, but he never found it. There's a company searching on a claim known as the Workman Site. William K. Workman thought he had found the right area to locate the Tumacacori Mine. He filed a claim on property in Peck Canyon, 50 miles south of Tucson, in 1959. Workman built a small one-room shack to live in while he looked for the treasure. That would make him rich beyond all imagining. As Dave Ramsey says, live like no one else, so that later you can live like no one else. Workman started out with a partner, Morgan Hill, for a while, but the two parted ways. Treasure hunting tends to bring out some strange behavior. Workman began to show signs of rash thoughts. He wanted to remove a huge rock that was in the way of his search. He simply set several sticks of dynamite on top of the rock, lit the fuse, and ran. The explosion was tremendous, but the effect was minimal. All the energy that was released up and away from the rock. Workman, being a professional treasure hunter and having worked with explosives, would have known the dynamite had to be set inside the rock and not on top. It was as if his mind just wasn't working anymore. Workman died in 1967. His claim expired and it sat there for years until a new group, the Pate Expedition, found the paperwork and went to investigate the site. In 1990, the new hunters began moving rocks and brush using bulldozers. They did find a partially collapsed tunnel that looked like a mine entrance. They also found tools that were used in mining. On two of the trees in the area, they found crosses carved into the bark. And not just a couple of lines dug into the trunks, but very elaborate carvings. Someone took a lot of time and effort to make these symbols, but nobody knows who or why. There's a stone wall built on the claim. It is the result of a lot of work. Once more, nobody knows what this wall was for. The old workman's shack was demolished by the Forest Service. The building was falling down, and it was considered to be a risk to anybody entering. The shack location is still listed on maps and is used as a means of navigating the rugged terrain. Using electronic equipment, the hunters located an anomaly 60 feet underground. Having worked themselves far too hard for far too long, the treasure hunters took a break to regroup and recover. They would return with better equipment and fresh supplies. Before leaving, all the rocks had to be pushed back as close as possible to their original locations. Any signs of construction had to be erased. This was a requirement of their permit to work on government land. Make the land look as much like it did before they got there. The government will never ignore an opportunity to come up with new and mind-bending regulations. In January 1991, the Pate expedition had to stop work so a notice could be placed in the newspapers telling the world where they were currently working, so anybody with a claim to the site could come forward to dispute the new work being done. The Forest Service said they had forgotten to tell the treasure hunters about this requirement the year before. What I don't understand is, if anybody had a claim to the site, wouldn't it be filed at the assayer's office in Tucson? The Pates had to sit and wait for 45 days before they could get back to work. During this time, a lot of less-than-law-abiding folks snuck into the site and had to look around in the hopes of finding some silver laying around. Many fellow treasure hunters did stop by just to say hello to the guys sitting around waiting. With time to kill, the treasure hunters did some more research. They found a reference to a possible new dig site. Eusebio Mario Morales de Mora had written about a mine that had been dug into a granite hill that looked like the crown of thorns placed on Jesus' head. The work on the workman's site would need to be concluded before any other sites could be investigated. When the current location didn't pan out, the Pate expedition moved their equipment to where they thought the mine might be. They had found a rock outcropping that did kind of look like a crown of thorns. The bulldozer was used to create a roadway of sorts so the men could work. The electronic equipment was used to survey the ground underneath. They could see there was something down there. Now they just had to figure out what it was and how to get to it. Up pops the Forest Service. The Pate expedition was told their permit was being withdrawn. Why was this done? The Forest Service didn't give any reason. They didn't have to. Hey, they're the government. It turned out a local hiking club that wanted to use the canyon for their own enjoyment had been putting pressure on the head of the Forest Service. Being from the area, they had more pull than a bunch of outsiders. Pate appealed this decision and was able to get the treasure trove permit renewed once again. The treasure hunters went back into the canyon once again. The bulldozer was able to dig down 50 feet into the roadway they had previously made. The floor of the pit had blue-colored rock. A sample of the rock was sent off for closer examination, but they didn't find any traces of silver or gold. The dozer continued digging, causing a partial cave-in. Not to be deterred, the work continued. The workers found a bowl-shaped depression. The men believed this was a part of the original Spanish mine. They began clearing out the depression, hoping to find a mine shaft. Once more, the sides collapsed, and the opening was not found. The trench was considered to be just too dangerous, so it was filled back in, and they sat down to try and come up with a new plan. I couldn't find any more about the paid expedition, and whether or not they ever found anything to show for all their hard work. The pull of finding treasure is still dragging people into the wilderness to risk everything for the hopes and dreams of finding enormous wealth. Some people think this is an easy way to get rich. Treasure hunting is far from easy. Between the weather, dangerous working conditions, poisonous snakes and bugs, nasty people, and extreme conditions, treasure hunting is more like some of the hardest work on Earth. There's a lot more to treasure hunting than buying a metal detector and then walking around the country, swinging it back and forth and listening for a beep. First of all, you need to find a location where there's a good possibility of finding something besides leverite rocks. Research is sometimes 95% of the hunt. This means long hours sitting in a library or an archive somewhere looking for old documents referring to a location where either someone found something or was transporting said items or buried it to keep the treasure safe from others. Then, you'll need permission from whoever owns the land to go looking for valuables. It is up to you to negotiate with the landowner on how much of a split you will get. If you're lucky, you might get a 50-50 split. This means you get half of what you find. You also need to have in writing if this split involves any heavy equipment you might have to rent. 50% of the profit or 50% of the treasure. The areas you might be working can be extremely difficult. Most of the really good locations are way out in the desert, where all your water has to be carried with you on your back. Hot, dry, and far. Places where there are no roads, so you need to have good legs, a strong back, and no physical problems that might end your day, if not your life. You need the right kind of equipment as well. It has to be rough enough to be used in inhospitable locations, yet light enough to be carried a long way. If you do manage to find a spot to search that you can drive to, be sure you have enough gas to get there and then back out. There might be animals around that see you as being a handy snack. What we call fast food is not what they considered fast food. You should have a gun big enough to kill anything found in the area you're searching. Anything you dig out of the ground will have to be carried back to where you parked your vehicle. That is, if you even find anything worth hauling out. Gold is very heavy, and silver is kind of heavy. If you were to dig up one of those 250-pound silver slabs, how are you going to get it into the bed of your truck? How are you going to get it from the desert to where your truck is parked? Things you got to think about before you're standing there in the middle of nowhere. If you don't find enough to worry about the weight, you probably didn't find enough. What are you going to carry your prize in? Your pockets can only hold so much. Do you have a good strong backpack that you can load with treasure if you find any? Legal issues can come up once something worth fighting for comes out of the ground. Suddenly all the landowner's relatives will show up saying they have some kind of a claim to the treasure. You really need to have all the information spelled out ahead of time. What if there's some kind of a lien on the land? What if somebody owns all the mineral rights to the land, and the person that owns the land only has the land itself? If your huge treasure was found on government property, you had best be in possession of a current treasure hunting license or a land use permit, or you'll probably be thanked for all your hard work, and you're lucky if you don't get fined and wind up in jail. You also will probably not get to keep anything, not even enough to pay for the batteries in your metal detector. Just how good is the information you found while looking through all those old musty books and maps? You might have found a really good treasure map only to arrive at the site and find out that somebody else has already dug up what you're looking for. If you can find it in a library or an archive, so could somebody else. Are you reading something written down by the folks who buried the treasure, or are you looking at some tall tale told by some guy who heard a story from his next-door neighbor who heard it from his mailman? Do you really understand the information you just read? Is that reference to a rock that looks like a monkey the one you think you're looking at? I've been to the Monkey Rock in Lost Maple State Park. It looks like a monkey only if you look at it from the right angle. Time changes how landmarks look. Wind and rain, along with earthquakes and land development, will change how huge rocks appear. Most importantly, are you really smarter than all those folks who went looking for the treasure only to be found dead somewhere or never return? Are you willing to risk everything on a chance the research you did or that map you found are legit? Should you decide you have what it takes to go find the treasure, the Tumacacori Mine, or the Lost Dutchman, or any of the legendary lost or hidden treasures, you should consider taking along some friends. This brings up the question, how well do you know these people, and do you trust them not just with your life, but with the insanity that might come from finding a huge treasure? If you don't like guns, just remember, there are things and people out there in the wilderness that you might find difficult to reason with. Try convincing a mountain lion to stop gnawing on your foot, or a bear that you're not a picnic basket. There are folks that wouldn't think twice about killing you to take whatever you have that they want. As a hobby, you could enjoy a weekend swinging a metal detector around an open field. As far as being your life's work, it just might lead to a very short life. Hope you enjoyed tonight's show. If you did, tell your friends, let them know what they're missing. If you have an idea for a show that you'd like to hear, you can contact me at strangethings@arcanasa.com. If you'd like to listen to some of the previous shows that are archived, you can find all of the past shows right up to the very first one on YouTube. But when you search for my shows, you have to type in the whole name, Strange Things with Chris James, because there are about 12 different podcasters out there now using the Strange Things name. I had it first. Until next Saturday, this is Chris James for Strange Things.
Are you coming to the tree where they strung up a man, the same murder three? Strange things that happen here, how stranger would it be if we met at midnight in the hanging tree?